Okay, I got us. We are recording. We're going.
Okay, great. So I am here with Tony Overbay. Tony, can you give us an introduction to
Yeah, you
you?
bet.
Tell us who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah. So, and I'm noticing on the screen that we're recording, it's coming up with Anthony Overbay, and I think that's what if you go. But it's Tony. I go by Tony. I do. I always wanted to do that thing where, people that I didn't know called me Anthony, and then my friends call me Tony, but I kind of couldn't get used to that. Completely. Story that is not applicable. But yeah, so I'm Tony Overbay. I'm a marriage and family therapist. And so as far as the background goes, I'm actually a very old man. So I'm pushing 49. Hard to tell, I think, with the bald part. But I just say that because I've been married for 28 years. I think it'll be 28 in a week. I have 4 kids. I married my high school sweetheart, that whole wonderful story. And but I started out in high tech, so computer software. And that was one of those things where I got a degree, and I actually wanted to pursue some sort of career in psychology in college. But it was one of those things where I had a teacher, a professor, and I don't remember him. So it isn't like I'm going to out him and say, darn you, professor, whatever. But where he said, it can be challenging to get a career in psychology, or if you don't want to teach, or I forget what he said. But to me, it was just like, oh, darn it, I'll do something else. And so, but I was always fascinated by people. And I think a lot of therapists and life coaches say that they were that person that people would always come to and, ask questions. I don't know if that was your experience as well growing up, if you were the person people turned to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So I love that. But then I found myself in a computer software career, and it was fine, but it just wasn't scratching the itch. I felt like I was just selling widgets.
People don't usually go to the tech guy.
Yeah, no, they don't. And the funny part was, so I did work for a company where I got to do presentations all over the world. And so then I found those times I started working in all kinds of gimmicks and gags and jokes and it was like, oh yeah, by the way, we also have software, so I felt like that wasn't quite maybe the right place to be.
Not your
And
thing, yeah.
no, and I really did feel, and I've never told this story. I remember one time we were at a trade show and there was like this dock worker that was helping us unload all of our stuff about our booth. And some of the guys I worked with knew that a lot of people would open up to me and almost like, so they said, okay, go see what you can kind of get out of that guy, And so I go over, hey, thanks for helping us move the stuff. Tell me about yourself. And so I was able to come back about 10 minutes later, and I was saying, okay, he's on his second marriage. Things are a little bit rocky. He just got a tattoo that symbolizes this. And they were like, whoa, and I just thought, all right, what am I doing here in this software industry? But then I really did. I kind of felt a calling to, okay, I always felt like, okay, I should go back and get my master's in counseling. And at that point, I had 4 little kids, and I had been working in that industry for about a decade. And I know your audience will appreciate this. I was teaching early morning seminary, and I just felt like I had a lot on my plate. But then I also recognized not getting any younger, and I can go ahead and start going back to school, and 2 years is going to pass at some point, and I'll either have my master's or I won't. So then once I got into the master's program in marriage and family therapy, all of a sudden I realized, oh, so if you actually like what you're studying, then school is kind of fun, And so then it was a whole different experience. I read the textbooks, which I had never really done before, did homework, all those things. And then I just found like, okay, this is my passion. But I felt specifically called to talk to men. I wanted to work with men. I wanted to help them become better husbands and fathers and that sort of thing. And I know I maybe said this before on my own podcast, but as I was in my grad school program and I would say that, and I was ready to have everyone go, oh my gosh, what a noble cause. But then people would kind of chuckle, and I never really thought, well, I don't think it was very funny. But then I found out that it's because when I got out in the world of counseling, not a lot of guys come to counseling. So it was a noble cause, but a bit maybe fruitless at first. And then
uphill battle.
Yeah, exactly. It was. And then so I started working with all kinds of clients. I was really working part-time at the time. I still owned a computer hardware company, and that's the whole thing. I love the talking with people and communicating and seeing how they work. But then I was in this industry of just, I don't know, pieces and parts and, technology. And so, I just found myself wanting to do more and more therapy. And I was really just doing therapy as more of this passion. I was working for my church at LDS Family Services at the time and seeing just a handful of clients. And I just kept, okay, I want to do more of that and more of that. And so then working with men, I started then getting trained specifically in the areas of primarily pornography addiction, compulsive sexual behavior, some things like faith journeys, those sort of things. But then I started to get that population, men. So it's kind of funny that now, I don't know, a decade plus later and 1,000 guys later working on pornography addiction and compulsive sexual behavior, that wasn't the goal. The goal was just to work with guys. But now I realize that this area does help them become better husbands and fathers and, just more connected. So, I guess it all kind of came to a head, and then I found this area that I really enjoy. And I know I'm going on and on here. But then I found that the more men I worked with, the more I found out that the pornography addiction was maybe the thing that I was the presenting issue that brought them in the room. But I'm finding that it was more for kind of like a coping mechanism for not feeling like they had a fulfilled life, that they weren't as connected to their partners, or they weren't connected with their kids, or they didn't like their job, or they weren't in the shape that they wanted to be, or they weren't good in their faith. And so all of these things led them to feel uncomfortable. And when, they were so used to this, when I don't feel good about myself, then I want to detach or check out. And then the siren song of pornography that maybe they've been involved in since the time they were a kid. And now there's like these, deep neural pathways kind of cut in there. And then they turn to the addiction. And so then the addiction brings with it the feel-good chemicals and the rush. So then at any time now, the brain would tell them, if you're not feeling good about something, hey, we got something you can do over here. But then it's this vicious cycle. So, boy, that's a long introduction, right?
That's great.
So there you go. That's who I am.
It's great to get to know more about you. And I love your story. I love how you found your passion and you worked hard to get it done. And I love the work that you're doing, and you are helping so many people with such a major issue that is affecting families.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah. And it's not a fun one to talk about. I mean, a few years ago, I still feel like, we transitioned from that. If the kids ever see pornography, right, then we'll deal with it. Now it's like, oh no, not just when, but it's like, how often are you? When's the last time you saw it? And we need to talk about it. And this really will date me, but I remember I had these firesides and Fifth Sunday lessons I was getting asked to do a lot. And I would go in there, and Harry Potter was big at the time, which it's making a comeback, 20-year anniversary, right? But I would go in there, and you're not supposed to say Voldemort, and then because that would give him power. And I was like, okay, no, we need to talk about pornography. And I remember one time that didn't go over well, where I was like, all right, everybody say pornography, and it was like that wasn't very comfortable. So I kind of took that part out, but the Voldemort part stayed. And it was like, we need to be talking about it more. And especially as parents, it needs to be the norm. My kids, almost every family night, it's like, are we doing another pornography lesson? I'm like, no, we're not. But since you brought it up, when's the last time you saw it? But we want it to be able to be something we talk about. We really do. Yeah.
Yes. So thank you. I appreciate that you're talking about it and helping us that, maybe don't have as much knowledge about it as you do. Yeah. Helping us be more comfortable talking about it. So I appreciate that. So thank you.
Yeah.
So that leads us right into our first question. So why is pornography such a big issue? Like what long-term effects are you seeing as you work with people that struggle with pornography?
I think, and maybe if I go way off on a tangent, you can kind of say, all right, let's say get back to where the question was. But I feel like setting the stage a bit for the last decade, I do feel like it was more of maybe the religious community that was hammering the drum of pornography is a bad thing. And I feel like over the last year or two now, we've got enough data that backs up that even in the non-religious setting that it's a bad thing. I mean, it's over half of all divorces now have a component of pornography addiction or compulsive sexual behavior, or, now that we learn more about the way that the brain works, and we just know that. So now here I transition into the answer is, I mean, it definitely leads to a lack of connection. I mean, you're not as authentic or there or present with your partner. And I always use this phrase, and it maybe sounds dramatic, but it does warp one's view of sexuality. Because when people, and I'll hear people say, okay, but isn't it good if it helps get things going, in the bedroom or whatever? And I'm like, no, then that means that there's a lack of connection there. Let's work on that. But I realize part of what's hard about that is it carries, if we're talking about anything that has to do with pornography or even sexuality, then here comes the guilt and the shame, and then we feel uncomfortable talking about these things. And so And ironically, that is the part that leads to people turning to pornography, is then they feel like if they're not connected with their partner, even if they're not as intimate as they want to be, instead of having an uncomfortable conversation, which I will tell you down the road, go, if you get help, go see a therapist, that sort of thing. It ends up not being an uncomfortable conversation. You get to a point where you can talk about anything with your partner. That's our goal. Because if not, then we think, okay, man, I want to say something, but I know it's not going to go well, or I feel like, I'm too embarrassed or ashamed. And then here comes the guilt and the shame, which then leads to isolation. And now we get right back into that. I feel uncomfortable. And here comes the brain saying, hey, I got something that, you can do that will take your mind off of this uncomfortable feeling. So that just keeps this addiction cycle going. So why is it an issue? Because it just causes people to detach. It causes a tremendous amount of shame. And then it can lead to some really serious issues down the road, and especially in relationships. I know we want to get to that point, but when there is that concept of betrayal, or there is disclosure, or someone is caught, and then kind of where that leads. So I don't know if that 10-minute answer answered the question or not. I hope so.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Perfect. So you mentioned that there's starting to be more scientific research.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that specifically, like what effect that it's having on the brain?
Yeah, this is the part that gets really interesting. And I pulled up one of the studies, I did a whole podcast episode on this. Actually, this and a couple of studies on my podcast, and I love how it's got the clickbait heading. It's Harvard scientist reveals the shocking impact of watching porn, the kind of the clickbait thing, right? But it's a guy named Kevin Majerus, and he's a psychiatrist specializing in cognitive behavioral therapy at Harvard Medical School. Well-vetted person, but I want to give him credit, because he writes it as this. Says scientists have discovered, actually I'm about to tell a story, but then we're going to get to the brain part. Okay. So scientists have discovered that if you place a male rat in a cage with a receptive female, they will mate. But once done, the male rat will not mate more times, even if the female is still receptive. And I have to be honest now, the jokes in my brain want to know, like, well, I don't know, maybe she's got other things to do, right? Or maybe I don't know, maybe he's not very interested either, but I don't think that's the point. But then it says you put in a second receptive female and he will immediately mate again. And then if you put in a third, so on until he nearly dies. And that effect has been found in, Majerus says, every animal studied. And this is called the Coolidge Effect. So right now we're kind of thinking, why am I telling a story about rats and their mating habits, right? But here's where it says pornography's power comes from the way it tricks the man's lower brain. I think this is important. So we look at there's the different parts of the brain. The lower brain we call the Neanderthal brain, the reptilian brain, the reactionary brain. But he said one of the drawbacks of the region is of the lower brain is it can't tell the difference between an image and reality. And I think this brings it into play or focus for a lot of people. The same processes are kicked off if someone is seeing a person in reality versus an image or video on the screen. So then Majerus says the problem with pornography is it offers men an unlimited number of supposedly willing females. Every time a man sees a new potential partner, even on a computer screen, it will activate his sex drive again. And so here's where the more brain stuff comes in. So we got this feel-good chemical called dopamine. And dopamine, I don't know, I feel like everybody's kind of talking about dopamine. It's the hip new neurotransmitting drug these days. Dopamine plays a role in ADD. That's a lack of dopamine. So somebody who is losing their focus, like I'm probably doing right now, is their brain is basically seeking, where can I get a nice bump of dopamine? And so it's like maybe here, maybe here, maybe here. But so here's what he says about with pornography. He says dopamine is the drug of desire. When you see something desirable, your brain pours out dopamine saying, go for it, do whatever it takes. So he said dopamine fixes your attention on that desirable object, giving you a power of concentration. Again, kind of, you can put that back into that ADD model, for example. So then he says, when somebody clicks and sees a new pornographic image, here comes that lower Neanderthal brain, and it thinks that is the real thing. And so his brain says, this is someone he must win over. And so it is going to send an enormous flood of dopamine to the brain, but causing this amount of electrical energy. So the brain thinks it's doing what it's supposed to, even when it's seeing pornography. And so he says the first exposure to a new female who is a potential mate was something that only happened maybe one time to our ancestors. So the brain was really good at saying, we got to go all in to get this woman because, there might not be more. There's not a lot of people on the plain or the prairie or that sort of thing. So now, and I like how he said this, he said that, so the brain thinks it's a big deal when it sees this image of a woman. So now the game is completely changed. It doesn't understand that these are virtual females. The brain doesn't. And so with each new image or video or whatever that the person's watching with pornography, it causes another flood of dopamine to get into the system time after time. And it creates, he's kind of on this dopamine binge. And I hope this is like, haven't lost anybody yet, right? People are kind of thinking, get to the point. But here it is. So that's why then pornography is this vicious circle, because when somebody views pornography, then they get overstimulated by dopamine. And then so much so in this dopamine binge that the brain destroys some of these dopamine receptors. And so then that makes him feel depleted. And so then when he goes back to pornography with fewer dopamine receptors, this time it requires more dopamine to get the same thrill. And so, that which then causes his brain to destroy more of the receptors. And so you can kind of see how it literally is changing the neurology of the brain. So then that's when people start looking at pornography longer and longer, or they might amp up to things that maybe are, if we're being honest, like they're worse. Yeah. Right. They do, because they're doing that to try to have that same effect. The brain is just trying to say, okay, here's another, female, I got to get her. And now it's like, give me some more dopamine, it's not working. So what can I do to kind of overstimulate and give me that dopamine binge? So that's the part where, kind of the role that it's playing in the brain. And then we know that the way the brain works, there's this part of the brain called the basal ganglia. It's the habit part of the brain. So a walnut-sized thing. I think it's on the top of the brainstem. Mm-hmm. And so when then something becomes habitual, now our brain, again, thinking it's doing the right thing, throws it into this basal ganglia. And then because the brain just says, okay, so now I know whenever this guy gets hungry, angry, lonely, tired, sleepy, depressed, whatever, then it calls into that basal ganglia habit center and says, do we got anything in there that can help? Any habits we can pull from? And then the brain says, you bet. And now it goes to the pornography, and now we're back into this vicious cycle. So that's the effect on the brain. It's kind of, I was going to say scary, but that's a really dramatic word. But it really does show you why it's important that we need to kind of disengage with pornography. And that's why, I've got this online program called The Path Back. And I always try to say, if you even think you have a problem, do something about it. It's as bold as I want to be by saying, hey, there's no need to look at pornography. There's just nothing productive about it. So, even a lot of people that say I don't have a problem may go weeks or months without viewing it, but then they go back to it. And so, we don't even want that, because we're gaming this dopamine system. This dopamine binge is like killing off some neuroreceptors. I only got one brain, so we want to do whatever we can to protect it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, another 15-minute answer. Sorry, Heidi.
No, that's exactly what I want. Okay. So you did bring up your program, and I was going to talk about this at the end, but I think this might be a good point to bring that up. We talk about the severity of this and the damage that people are doing to their brain, but this can be reversed, right? Yeah. There are definitely things that people can do. Can you talk a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. And I hadn't even thought about this. I'm glad you asked that, because I do get people in my office that, they even say, hey, I've tried to get over this, or it doesn't work, or right. And then, the part that almost breaks my heart is when somebody will say, okay, I just want to be able to get to the point where I can manage it. And I understand, and I have to meet the client there. But what I want to scream is say, I say the majority of people I work with get to a point where they no longer need or use. But right now, and this is where I come up with this concept. I've got a podcast about it called your emotional baseline. So I feel like when you're in the trenches of addiction, your baseline of emotions is low. So, you're looking at all of these things that you think you're supposed to be doing in your life, and they almost seem unattainable or out of reach. But the more you start to kind of build some strength around, progress around removing pornography from your life, some strength-based things, we learn to get rid of the shame. The shame is what kind of keeps us in there, keeps people in this addiction cycle. But when you start to see, and okay, now I'm going to go off on a tangent, but so I understand. This is, I think, the hard part with a lot of maybe people that are in positions, like leadership positions, maybe in church or those sort of things, where then they say, okay, I need this done. Like, I can't have you do this anymore. And we know now there's a tremendous amount of evidence around the concept of harm reduction. So if we've got somebody that is just, they're deep in the throes of pornography addiction, and all of a sudden we're saying, hey, I need you to never do that again, and never think about it again, and be completely honest, and, of course, they're coming from this low emotional baseline. They're still in their addict brain that just says, I can't, and since I can't, and now I'm, I got somebody that is, I'm reporting to, and now I'm on the hook for this, then they feel even worse. And not knowing, so this is the person that doesn't know kind of what that addict brain looks like, then we just told that person that it's like, man, hey, here's a whole bunch of shame because you got to get this thing perfect. And if you don't, it's going to be really bad. So the addict brain just says, man, forget it. As a matter of fact, then when they feel bad about themselves, when that shame comes in, here we go. The brain says, hey, I know what to do with that, right? And we're like, no, I can't. And I'll see people that'll go a couple of weeks, especially after they got caught or whatever. And they're like, okay, I will never do this again. But then that shame kind of creeps in, or the feeling of hopelessness or that sort of thing. And then again, these are deep neural pathways that are just dug into the brain in this habit center. So we need to start, I love the concept of start looking at the things that we can do or add, and maybe not as much of the, we want to get rid of this. We do. And I have some people that really can just say, okay, I cannot do this anymore. But then they just work like crazy to kind of put the good things in their lives, to work on like changing the relationship with their thoughts, mindfulness, that sort of thing. But then there are other people that from time to time may still have a relapse, and then they just feel like, see, I couldn't do it. Might as well just give up. And that's the part that we want to try to change the view on. We got to kind of go more strength based with this. I don't know. Was that the question? I think I maybe was answering a different question by now, right?
No, that was great.
Okay.
That was great.
Good. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So, shifting gears just a little bit, I wanted you to specifically talk about pornography in marriage relationships. And most of my listeners are women and wives, and talk about how they can love and support their husbands who have a pornography addiction, and help them as they are struggling when a spouse is addicted to pornography. Okay. So what challenges do you see in marriages when one partner has an addiction to pornography? Yeah,
I think, boy, this is where we get a little bit deep, right? Because I do, about a year and a half or 2 years ago, I started doing a lot of training around the concept of betrayal trauma. So I've worked with the addicts for years, and then I start doing a lot of the couples therapy because I really do feel like at the core, there's this lack of connection. So I started doing a lot of couples therapy, and then I did start seeing what these effects were of, here's a couple that there's been a disclosure, and now there's this feeling of betrayal, but they want to make things work. And that's hard. And so then I started working with a group out of Utah, the Addo Recovery Center, and specifically a group called Bloom for Women. And they're all about betrayal trauma. And there's a guy there, Dr. Skinner, who's written books on overcoming pornography addiction, who also then turned the focus of his research on this concept of betrayal trauma. So now there's so much good data and resources there about how we can help the spouse, how we can help the wife. Because I feel like the biggest challenge is, now there's this disclosure, and we look at betrayal trauma, and the symptoms of betrayal trauma are right along the lines of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because now here's this disclosure, and here's somebody that had been hiding something for a long time. And now let's just say that in the case, the wife finds out, and it's normal. How does she not go back and say, wait a minute, was our whole marriage, has it been, a sham, or what about, is this about me, or how dare he, or, he sat there beside me and heard talks about this and said, man, can you believe guys do that? We just go through, and now it's just, and the brain just starts running these thoughts through our head, and it kind of ups these stress hormones in the body. And we just, all of a sudden, it just feels like fight or flight all the time. And so the biggest challenges I see are that part. So here's where I would I would beg people to, when there is that discovery, if somebody's caught, hopefully if a husband feels like, okay, I got to get this under control, and then he comes and says, I need help with this. But at that point, I think it's really important to find a therapist that's trained in addiction recovery, betrayal trauma, specifically the betrayal trauma part, because I don't want to throw horror stories out there, but I'd even thrown in my notes that, I've had clients come into my office where, I can think of a few now where a wife will come to me and she'll say, I went to a therapist who their first question was, well, what was your role in this? Was there not enough intimacy? And it's like, oh my gosh, here's somebody that was went through betrayal trauma, and now you're saying, you know, and by the way, it was probably your fault, right? When it isn't. I mean, it just isn't.
Guilt.
Oh, that one kills me. Like that one, I noticed that my heart rate is raising right now. So I just say get professional help from somebody who recognizes, because here's some of the things that are going to happen. Let's say that the guy does get caught, or let's say he says, okay, I just got to get this off my chest. The reality is there is going to be some relief for him saying, finally, it's out there. You know, I'm not carrying around this baggage, you know, that sort of thing. And so it's wild because he'll be like, oh, I feel so good. To then a wife who didn't have any idea, or maybe had an idea, but really didn't want to believe that this was going on. So now all of a sudden he's just saying, man, yeah, you know, I've been doing this for years, you know, and the time we were on vacation and I took a phone call, I wasn't, you know, and it's like, whoa, you know, that's that disclosure piece. We want to have that kind of, and that's where I go back to, there's a lot of good research around how to do disclosure. You know, that's a big piece of it. There's a concept called staggered disclosure that we see as therapists a lot, where, you know, the husband then says, okay, the wife says, okay, I want to know everything. Right. So then the husband says, okay, I'll tell you everything. But still, he's like, I've never been through this before either, you know? So I'm going to tell her a lot of things. But he's like, I don't know if I'm going to keep a couple things back because they're really embarrassing, you know? So then wife maybe feels even better in that moment, but then comes back around the next day, asks a few questions. And all of a sudden he's like, okay, I should tell her this too. Right. Not realizing that he's feeling like, man, here I go. I'm unburdening again. Isn't this awesome? But she just got re-traumatized. So, and now she's saying, wait a minute, you told me last night that told me everything. And now you're telling me everything again. And by the way, when you told me that, you know, you were doing this, we had 10 years of you telling me you haven't been, you know? So it's just this staggered disclosure, this re-traumatizing event over and over. So I just say, please go get help, because there is a lot of good help out there. But please find someone that knows the concept of betrayal trauma. And I'm a big fan of, for women, I mean, go to Bloom for Women, bloomforwomen.com. It's a whole community of like therapists and people that have been through this. And there's online programs and classes and bulletin boards and all that stuff. And it's all, you know, it's a good place to start, because you know, here's the part where let me give some hope. I mean, the couples piece, I've been doing this long enough now that I honestly can say that, and this is always the bizarre part, but you get a couple, there's been the betrayal trauma or the disclosure. And let's say that the guy is like, I want to make this work. I'll do whatever it takes. And there's, you know, we have ways to kind of make that work, you know, I don't know, framework in place to where you can have productive conversations and disclosure and all that sort of thing. And then you get to this place where now you really do learn how to communicate. I've got a couple of my podcasts on this concept called EFT, emotionally focused therapy. It's a couples type of therapy that really is about, you know, I'm going to share with you my heart, I'm going to be vulnerable, my emotional bid. And this framework allows for then a partner to turn off their fixing and judgment brain and say, okay, I want to hear from my partner. I want to know what this experience is like for you. And I'm going to give you empathy. And then I'm going to share what, you know, my truths, what this is like for me. And that is like a very, very productive way to communicate. So I have couples that get through this whole betrayal trauma thing, and now they communicate better than they ever have before. And it's almost like I'm waiting for it to the moment where then somebody says, man, it's wild to think that if we wouldn't have had this traumatic event, we wouldn't now be communicating the way we are. I mean, it's, you know, I'm not saying if you go create a traumatic event just so that you can get to this place. You know, you can go to couples therapy without this too, you know, but I just want to throw that hope out there that it may seem intense and heavy and full of anxiety at first, but, you know, you get through the end and now you communicate better. You really are honest. We find out, you know, that the addiction is not about the wife. It's, you know, it's this guy's dealing with a bunch of stuff and he doesn't know how to deal with it. And he's got this bad pattern of the way to deal with things, and all of that can be addressed. So, and I'm looking down. Yeah. Did I answer? Was that did we finish somewhere close to where the question started?
Yes. No, that's great. And I love that you included that there is hope.
Oh, a ton of hope. I mean, that's why I love, I have to tell you, I mean, I've said this one a few times. I was going to say hated, but that's a bad word in my family. I did not enjoy couples therapy early on in my career at all. If I had 1 or 2 couples a week, I thought, you know, this is brutal. But then once I got locked in on this EFT, emotionally focused therapy modality, it is so, I mean, it's evidence-based, it's strength-based, and it's so good that now I'm seeing 20, 25 couples a week. I love the couples therapy because it breaks my heart now to know that there are couples out there that don't communicate well, that they don't feel like they can open up to their partner. And so, yeah, there's not only there is hope, but it's like, man, hurry up and get to that hope, because it's a whole different relationship that most people, I think, never even knew they could get to,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So continuing with the couples therapy, I think one of the biggest challenges for women is that they want to love and support their husbands as they're dealing with a pornography addiction, but they struggle to support their husband, but to also not give the idea that they approve of the behavior.
Yeah.
Can
What's
you
the condone? Yeah. They don't want to condone the behavior,
yeah.
hate the sin, love the sinner kind of thing. Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 Can you
Yeah.
talk
So,
about that and how to
yeah.
balance?
So if so I like to kind of look at that as if I'm working, let's say I'm working with the woman as an individual therapy, which happens a lot too. I mean, the reality is, and I don't want women to then feel like, well, if he's not willing to go into therapy, then forget everything. I really want him to, but at times maybe he is still feeling stuck in the shame cycle or that sort of thing. And he's so embarrassed or whatever. I mean, I almost, as I'm saying that, want to say, yeah, but well, this will fit in. So I'm working with the woman. What I'm going to start working with is, no, we want to get her as authentic as she can be. I want to do self-care with her. I want to raise her emotional baseline. I want her to feel empowered. I want her to know that she's worth not having to then have pornography in the home, or not having, I mean, if that's not what she feels comfortable with, then I want to get her to the place where she can speak that truth. And even if she's not getting back the support, that she knows that that's important to her. And I don't know, I don't know if that makes sense, but I want to empower a spouse to say, I can love you, but I can also recognize what this addiction does to you. I can recognize the effects of pornography, and I don't have to compromise my standards or values. I mean, I feel like I'm going to say this and it might not sound right, just because we're married. I mean, I feel like because we're married, then I want to get her to a place where she can say, this is what I need from this relationship. And it's one that does not involve pornography. I don't know. I don't know how that feels. I've never really kind of put that all out there like that before. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No,
okay.
No, that's great. Yeah, I think that's just a really difficult.
Well, and that's why I think that's why I'm hesitating right now, is because I feel like I can make everything sound like just do this, but then it's like, I can get somebody for an hour in a week and feel empowered and my boundaries, and then they can go home, and then their husband, is like, look, I said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it again. Can we not talk about this? But now we go back to that in the world of betrayal trauma, the PTSD symptoms are, no, she's going to get triggered. If all of a sudden she sees him put his phone away really quick, then the healthy way to work with that is she gets to say, hey, I feel like when you put your phone away, my mind goes to, you're hiding something. And instead of having a guy say, hey, you know what? I told you I'm sorry. Like, I don't need you invading. It's like, no, I need that. I need her to feel empowered that she can say that, because the only way to address a trigger is to be able to express it and have a spouse who's going to know to say, okay, I can understand where you're coming from with that. And I'm sorry if I put you in a spot where every time you see me on my phone, that's where you go. And so I'll do whatever it takes, so that's a bit of helping her become or feel empowered about that. So she doesn't have to just sit with these triggers and feel like I can't do anything about it. I already told him that I'm upset, so I can't talk about it anymore. No, we want to get to the point where we can talk about it. So I think that's the part where I can make that sound easy, but then somebody can go home and then they're back in kind of that same environment, and now the whole room or the house or the area are full of triggers, and they get overwhelmed and they feel like they can't talk about it. So I think that's the hard part.
Yeah. Okay, so along the same lines, what suggestions do you have on maintaining an intimate relationship when there's been a pornography addiction?
Okay. So my first thing would be, all right, we got to get into couples therapy, because I really, and I'm projecting, I'm probably going worst case here, the couples therapist in me, but I don't want to see, I just don't want to see the wife then all of a sudden lose her voice with regard to what her view is on the connection or intimacy or that sort of thing. And I jotted down a note here, and this is a little bit of a big time soapbox topic for me, but so I feel like, and I'm about to do a podcast on this, and I actually have been putting it off forever because I want it to be just perfect. I darn near want to script this one, and it goes back to some of the work that I've done with this Dr. Skinner, who does all the work with betrayal trauma. but he has laid out these levels of intimacy. So I mean, yeah, so here's a preview, a heads up for a podcast I can't wait to do. But so typically we kind of go in on it's like this ladder view of intimacy, but we go in on the physical. So we are connected or we are attracted to someone physically. I mean, that's the way we work as humans for the most part. But there's now kind of evidence around the way intimacy works is if we look at it as a ladder, on the lower part of the ladder is psychological intimacy, which is like hope and loyalty and trust and commitment. And then when that's in place, above that is verbal intimacy. So now it's like, man, I can talk to my partner about anything and I feel connected. And above that is emotional intimacy. So now I feel like I can share my emotional, my emotions, my emotional bids, my hopes and dreams and fears. And, from an emotional standpoint, and I feel like my partner hears me. Above that one is cognitive and intellectual intimacy, where if we're connected on all these other levels, it doesn't matter if, one person is a rocket scientist and the other one is, now I don't want to say anything judgmental about someone else's career, but not a rocket scientist. We still feel connected because we're connected on all these levels. Above that is spiritual intimacy. So, if all these levels are connected, then we can even have slightly different views or different views on spirituality. And we still love each other because there's this foundation of intimacy. And on the top of that is physical intimacy. So that should be the byproduct of all these other levels. So the way to kind of get back to maintaining or growing or developing intimacy, I believe, is we have to kind of take that physical piece and just say, okay, I understand where we're at there. Because here's what happens is we get connected on this physical level, and then now all of a sudden we try to talk and it doesn't go well, and then, but we can connect physically. So we're okay. And then it's like, okay, I shared some emotions and he yelled at me and we pout for a few days, but then we connected physically. So we're okay. Right. And that's the pattern people get in. That's not a healthy pattern. We want those levels of intimacy kind of all connected so we can have then. So the physical intimacy then is the byproduct. And that's the way. So then I would say then we got to start looking at working on so now we look at that psychological intimacy, what's in there, trust, so now we need to be able to trust each other, and honesty and commitment. And, we need to be able to talk. I mean, we need to kind of go back to those basics to now change that whole relationship with intimacy. So that then physical intimacy now looks different, I guess. So I didn't expect to lay all that stuff out there. So, but yeah, now I got to do the podcast, right?
Okay. Well, we will be looking for it.
Yeah. So I hope did that answer it? Okay. Yeah.
Yes. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So what kind of final thoughts do you have for women who are struggling with a spouse with pornography addiction? Yeah.
I feel like I've been, all excited and all strength-based stuff. And now probably I worry I will get sappy now, but I get to speak a lot and I enjoy it. I love it. Whenever I speak with a group of women, like enrichment nights, relief society conferences, that sort of thing, I do feel, I just want to express just so much empathy I understand that there's, that especially around pornography addiction, how women will often feel like it is about them or that they're not enough or that there's something that they lack, or if they were more physically this or more whatever, and that's the part I wish I could give them a pill or a shot or something that would kind of remove that part for a while you work on the connection, because it's not about them. I mean, you're a good wife, you're a good spouse, you're a good person. And this is about his struggle, I don't think I've talked about this, but I mean, back in olden days, we would say if someone had been, the concept of sexualized was if there had been, sexual abuse or that sort of thing when they were young. And then now we know that early exposure to pornography, and now it's like 8 to 11 years old, that starts to change the neural pathways of the brain. I always say that's kind of laying the wiring under the foundation. So this is something that he has dealt with for a long time. It doesn't give him excuses, but it kind of helps us understand that, the brain, his brain is working differently. So a lot of times it's because, and I'm not trying to get a guy off the hook here, but it's like a lot of times it's because he doesn't feel like he's enough, or he doesn't feel like he's good enough for, or he doesn't feel like he's measuring up to why his brain turns to this now, deeply rooted neural pathway that says this addiction will bring him happiness, which even he knows it's not doing, but that's the part that just breaks my heart, that again, you say your audience is primarily female. And I just want to say, get the self-care going, set the boundaries. You are worth it. You are enough. You're good enough, And that's going to come through when you start trying to work on this connection, this new level of intimacy, and you get your relationship to this place now that you can talk and communicate. And it's just going to feel real. It's going to feel so much more connected. And you'll realize at that point, that's where I'm saying, trust me, that it wasn't about you. It was about the lack of connection or that sort of thing. So I don't know. I hope that made sense. But that's maybe final thoughts.
That's perfect. Thank you for
sharing
that.
Yeah. Boy, that went fast, right, Heidi?
It did. It did. Thank you so much. That was so much wonderful information and exactly what I was hoping to share with my audience. So thank you.
No, I had a blast. Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. Can you tell my listeners where they can find more from you?
Yeah, there's a part where now here comes a big imposter syndrome, because I can go to TonyOverbay.com, see my big giant bald head on the front page. I got to do something about that. Every time I look at there, I feel like it's like some ad for some Area 51 alien kind of museum or something like that. But TonyOverbay.com, sign up to receive, sign up for my email list. I don't spam. I hardly ever do anything with it, which is actually a problem. But because I'm creating programs on happiness, on couples therapy, I've got my Path Back program on pornography addiction. And it's a strength-based program. It is a hope-filled program to help people overcome pornography addiction and compulsive sexual behavior. So TonyOverbay.com, or the Path Back is at pathbackrecovery.com. Trying to do the whole Instagram thing like the kids do. So at Virtual Couch on Instagram. On Facebook, I've got a Tony Overbay licensed marriage and family therapist Facebook page. See, there's a part where I feel silly, right? It's like, where else? Also on Twitter, somebody had Virtual Couch. So it's at Couch Virtual, but also at Tony Overbay. Now I feel like, what else? Come on, me and Jonathan. Did you miss anything, Jonathan? Okay.
Your podcast.
Oh gosh, yeah, the whole thing that I did. Yeah, the Virtual Couch. Please, that's been such a fun thing. The feedback there blows my mind. And yeah, no, thank you. Yeah. So all those places, that would be great.
Okay. Well, thank you so much again.
Hey, thank you, Heidi. Okay. All right. Hey, we'll talk to you later. Thanks.